So, 2025. That was quite the year, wasn't it? And no less so in the realm of public transport improvements, and that's both for good and for ill. I mean, sure, there were many rough spots, challenges, and outright wars to slog through. But a lot of good stuff happened as well. A lot of good transit projects were completed, a lot of good reforms were happening, and I'm pleased to say that despite fears to the contrary, 2026 looks set to continue this trend. So let's cast an eye on some of the good stuff to look forward to with some transit projects that are being complete in the US of A in 2026. Let's get rolling. So with all that being said, let's get some idea of what I'll be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about major transit projects, particularly rail transit projects, that are scheduled to be open to the public in 2026. And I should note that there are not insignificant numbers of these projects that appeared in a video I made last year for transit projects that were supposed to open in 2025. But of course, everybody's favorite thing in the world, delays happen to them. So now the opening date is sometime this year. So yeah, let's see what stuff is supposed to open this year, starting with one that is the only one at the time of this recording that has an actual set date for its opening, rather than just a rounded month or a general "it will open this year" attached to it. That first project takes us to Seattle, to the opening of the Sound Transit Link Light Rail 2 line extension from its current terminus at Bellevue across Lake Washington to connect with the original Link Light Rail Line 1 in downtown Seattle, thus connecting both sides of the lake with a frequent transit service. The first part of the 2 line, also called the East Link extension, opened in 2024, with the portion between Bellevue and Redmond Technology Station, which is basically right next door to the global headquarters of Microsoft, and a smaller extension to downtown Redmond itself opened the very next year. However, the end goal was ultimately to connect this line, of which the initial segments were completely isolated from the rest of Sound Transit's rail network, to that network across Lake Washington. And to do that effectively, Sound Transit used a method that seems to be becoming more in vogue with building rail lines these days: building it in the middle of a highway. Namely, the extension runs in the right-of-way of Interstate 90 after servicing stops on a new right-of-way at East Main and South Bellevue, and then crosses the water onto Mercer Island, serving a highway median stop on the island before making the big crossing of the project across the lake. And that leads to the most interesting aspect of this whole project. With the tracks running in the existing right-of-way of Interstate 90, the line will run across the lake on the Homer M. Hadley Memorial Bridge, one of the longest pontoon bridges in the entire world. You heard me right, a pontoon bridge, aka a bridge that doesn't actually connect to the bottom of the lake, it just floats. Lake Washington actually has a few of those because apparently the bottom of the lake is far too muddy and unstable for normal bridge pillars. The new rail line takes over an existing part of the bridge that were once the bridge's express lanes, and test runs over the bridge have already started and apparently are going quite well. After the crossing, the line will serve another highway median station at Judkins Park before it meets up with the original Link Light Rail 1 line at International District Chinatown Station in downtown Seattle. I gotta say, this is really emblematic of the massive strides Seattle has been taking in recent years to build out a viable mass transit system. One that, while it probably should have been a heavy rail metro in a different timeline, it pushes light rail to its extremes and gets a lot done with it. And this is something like the 4th light rail extension we've seen in Seattle in the last 3 years. First was the original opening of the 2 line, then the Redmond extension, then the 1 line extension to Federal Way this past month, and now this, turning the system into something resembling an actual network at long last. And that day where one can actually take a Link Light Rail train to different places from downtown Seattle is currently set as April 25th. So it won't be too long at this point, assuming random delay syndrome doesn't affect this project like with certain other projects we'll be talking about. Speaking of which, June is expected to see at long last the launch of one of the transit projects that the city it runs in has been agonizing over for years, and that is Los Angeles' LAX People Mover, which is hoped to be the relief for having to negotiate the hell on earth that is getting to LAX.
This airport needed transit solutions pretty much from the day it was created, and over the last few years, both LA Metro and Los Angeles World airports have finally been actually connecting the city's most hated transport hub to the city proper using methods that aren't LA's infamously awful highways. This culminated last year in the opening of LAX Metro Transit Center Station, which brought the LA Metro C line from Norwalk to LAX, as well as finally connecting the disconnected sections of the K line at LAX, thus creating a connected light rail line between Expo Crenshaw and Redondo Beach. An excellent step to be sure, but there was one problem when LAX Metro Transit Center opened. The people mover to the airport wasn't ready yet. Instead, there was just a temporary bus shuttle from the station to the terminals. Well, that supposedly will change this June when the people mover finally starts running, connecting the airport's terminals with both the LAX Metro Transit Center and a gigantic new consolidated rental car garage nearby, making for a total distance of 2.25 miles using fully automatic trains from Alstom's Innovia family. Though it may not come in time to be entirely useful when LA hosts rounds of the World Cup this year at SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, but it will definitely be useful for when LA hosts the Summer Olympic Games in 2028. And more than that, it finally gives something, anything, that can replace one of the worst driving experiences in a city known for bad driving experiences. Now, that fact it will open this summer is rather alarming for one particular reason. This was originally supposed to open in 2023. However, everybody's favorite problem of all, delays and contract disputes happened, largely due to a strained relationship between Los Angeles World Airports and the consortium they contracted to build the People Mover, and the lack of clearly stated ways to resolve said disputes in their contracts. It's stuff like this, seemingly insignificant at first, along with political pressure to complete the project before big events, that can lead to horrible things to snowball to disaster if things start to go wrong. Just ask Maryland how that sort of thing can happen with the Purple Line. At least that one's getting done too, so both those projects can be signs that things can be overcome if the will is there to see it through, which LA seemingly has here. And speaking of things getting done in LA, there are two other projects that LA is finally completing in 2026, and one in particular is likely to be as pivotal as the LAX People Mover, but amped up to 13. And that's the completion of the first part of the extension of the LA Metro D line subway. LA really has been on a roll when it comes to actually getting mass transit done, and while the priority of projects and NIMBYism is insanely frustrating at every level, to say nothing of delays and the cost overruns of it all, it's still impressive how much they've been able to do. In the case of the D line, it's going to be one of their biggest wishlist items, and perhaps a precursor to something even better down the line. With plans going as far back as the opening of the D line, formerly known as the Purple Line, in 1993, construction of this first segment of 3 of what will be by far the longer of the two heavy rail metro lines in LA, the other being the B line from Union Station to Hollywood, will see the D line get an extension down Wilshire Boulevard from the current terminus at Wilshire Western Station in Wilshire itself to add 3 new stations before reaching a temporary terminus at Wilshire La Cienega Station, which means that the line's new terminus will be in, of all places, Beverly Hills. Yes, the place that has become a synonym of extravagance and luxury, and as a result being one of LA's most infamous NIMBYvilles that has historically complained about such projects, to the point that some of these places have been willing to drain from their own school districts to fight these projects in court, and lose, repeatedly, all to stop a project that overall will no doubt be a net benefit to the community and the city. Sad, really, especially since this extension alone will make the D line much more viable from a ridership standpoint and be a booster, even before the next 2 phases of the project will open. The second of the 3 extensions, a 2-stop one from Wilshire La Cienega through Beverly Hills to Century City, is currently projected to open in 2027, which is also supposedly the same year when the final 2-stop extension to Westwood, ending at Westwood VA Hospital Station and having a stop that serves UCLA, will be open in time for the Olympics, ultimately seeing the D line triple in length nearly, from the current 5 miles to 14. That latter extension, though, I'm not sure if that will continue to hold true, especially since this initial opening to Wilshire La Cienega was technically a delay from an opening last year. But there is little doubt to me that regardless of when it opens, it will not only be transformational for LA Metro and for the communities that it runs through along one of LA's most heavily traveled corridors, but it could very well be pivotal to the development of another massive project that LA is starting to make progress on. And that would be the Sepulveda line from the west side of LA up to the San Fernando Valley, also serving UCLA in the process like the D line would. This project has been making very good development in preparation to get funding, and a decision made very recently has sealed in writing what was likely to happen for months. And that is that the Sepulveda line will be, to the relief of everybody who wanted this project to actually work, an automated heavy metro system, as opposed to the stupid monorail concept that was being pushed by Chinese manufacturer BYD wearing a trench coat pretending to be an LA-based company. As recently confirmed in the draft economic impact review, ridership projections are laughable for the monorail alignments, and the cost savings are non-existent. So the monorail concept died there, and they picked option 5, one of the heavy rail metro options, much to the frustration of the NIMBYs in Sherman Oaks, and especially the former CEO of a concert-goer's version of Satan, Ticketmaster, who has been incredibly bitchy about this whole affair for years. And with this, I have only one reaction for them.
I'm on the complete opposite side of the country, and I could not be happier for LA at this. That's beautiful, man. Really show the NIMBYs who's actually in charge. Good going, LA. Keep it up.
So yeah, this is excellent news because this corridor, which parallels the infamous 405 freeway, desperately needed the best option available. I'm keeping an eye on this one for sure, thanks to the tireless efforts of Nanderd. Absolutely check out his channel for happenings in the development of LA's transit system and the agony that comes with it. His stuff is amazing. In any case, let's just knock the stuff in SoCal out of the way with one more project to mention, since it would be kind of awkward if we just came back to it later in my opinion. And that would be, oh looky, it's another project I mentioned in last year's video. It's the OC Streetcar, serving, well, the OC, Orange County, California, and the city of Santa Ana to be specific. Being the first rail project to be seen from beginning to end by Orange County's transit agency OCTA, this line is a modern streetcar line that will run 4.2 miles from the Santa Ana Transportation Center, where one can connect with 2 lines of the Metrolink commuter rail system, the Orange County and Inland Empire Orange County lines, as well as Amtrak's Pacific Surfliner. And from there, it will street run along West Santa Ana Boulevard through Santa Ana itself, before reaching a rebuilt dedicated right-of-way which was formerly the Santa Ana branch of the famous Pacific Electric Railway, running northwest to the Harbor Gateway Transit Center in Garden Grove, where the streetcar connects to several OCTA bus services. I've been seeing a lot more press about this line recently since testing of the track and vehicles has gotten underway, so it's looking a lot more promising that this year we'll see this project finally get completed. Here's hoping this line sees success so that OCTA gets less stage fright to present the idea that probably should have been built first, build the center line, and move this sprawling town and county south of LA to being something that can actually prove to be a viable place to live in a more transit-reliant world. Anyway, after a deviation to get LA off to the side, we finally get back to the last of these projects that has had a rough starting date as of the time of writing this. And this one is very interesting and exciting to me for several reasons, and that is the Colorado Mountain Rail Project. In last year's recap, I talked about the expired lease that Union Pacific had in Colorado, where the famous Moffett line over the Rockies and through the famous 6-mile-long Moffett Tunnel means that the line goes from Union Pacific control back to the Colorado state government. This in turn gives the Colorado government better use of the line for passenger service, and this year, starting in November, we're likely going to see that manifest. For those unfamiliar with this route, alongside the freight traffic that uses the line between Denver and Grand Junction and beyond to the west, there are 3 passenger services that run on it at present. The most famous of them all is Amtrak's California Zephyr, which runs along this frankly beautiful route on its daily run between Chicago and the San Francisco Bay Area. The second is a luxury tourist train, the Rocky Mountaineer, which runs as a luxury cruise through the mountains taking 2 days from Denver to Moab, Utah. Although apparently this operation will be taken over by a new operator called Canyon Spirit and be extended to Salt Lake City this year. But the third one is the one to focus on here. During the winter months, Amtrak runs a daily special service called the Winter Park Express, running 56 miles between Denver and Winter Park just past the Moffett Tunnel for the benefit of the highly popular Colorado skiing market. However, under this new arrangement, Colorado is now looking to make the Winter Park Express a daily train year-round, and extending it far beyond Winter Park and through the mountains to Granby, Hot Sulphur Springs, and Kremmerling, and then diverging away from the California Zephyr's route to head to northwestern Colorado, snaking up the mountains to Oak Creek before serving the ski resort town of Steamboat Springs, and then to Hayden and finally Craig, Colorado, essentially being a modern revival of the Denver and Rio Grande's Yampa Valley Mail, which last ran on this route in 1968. If there is ever a project that looks to answer an eternal question of mine, one of which I'll make my own video about in the coming months, of if and how rural passenger rail services of the days of old can be returned for the future, this can be a good experiment to trial it. These towns in the northwest of the state are not particularly big by most standards. Steamboat Springs is the largest of around 13,000 people, and Craig is home to 9,000. But aside from the skiing and mountain tourist draw to the region, this line can easily be a vital new lifeline for a region of the state devoid of viable transit options. If this line succeeds, and I really hope it does, this could be a spark that ignites a wildfire down the line of a push to bring back a mode of transit that I think can truly make public transit expansion gain the political consensus across the board that it needs. Viable and reliable regional services to rural places and small towns. The rest of the world has it, we used to have it, we need it. Let's see Colorado's attempt. I'd love to have a chance to ride it when it does happen. So with the ones that we have concepts of a timeline for as their launch, as well as the SoCal segment, we have to get back to the rest of them. And let's start with a project coming to fruition on my beloved Northeast Corridor. It's one you may have seen once or twice on this channel, and that's the completion of the long-awaited Portal North Bridge across the Hackensack River between Secaucus and Kearney, New Jersey. For the uninitiated, this brand new double-track tall arch bridge is meant to replace the over 110-year-old Portal Bridge, a decrepit and severely unreliable swing bridge over the river which has an annoying habit of getting stuck in the open position, and thus is part of a major bottleneck of the Northeast Corridor. Portal North will not only be more reliable on account of it never needing to move for boat traffic, since it's tall enough for the boats to just go under, but it will see the line speed on this part of the route go from 60 miles per hour to 90, allowing for a low-key but significant speed increase between New York and Newark, one of the busiest parts of the corridor. This will also be the first completed piece of the much wider Gateway project, which, contrary to what some people in the current administration suggested, has not been terminated. The fact that work on the marquee piece of the project, the 2 new tunnels under the Hudson River, are still progressing with their pre-dig work, and the 2 huge tunnel boring machines being used for the project are being delivered as I speak, should be evidence enough. While there's no date that's been set for it, a recurring thought is that at least the first track on the bridge will be open for revenue service in late spring, with the second one opening basically anywhere between a few weeks later and sometime in 2027. To open a second track that's already been laid. Yeah, I don't get it either, but it does overall mean that this heavily congested part of the NEC will be faster and way more reliable in the very near future. And with the planned Portal South Bridge to be built basically where the old Portal Bridge was, and later the new Hudson tunnels, capacity is looking set to more than double over the next 10 years or so. It'll take a while, but it'll be worth it in the end. Speaking of worth it in the end, we stay in New Jersey for the next one. And that takes us from the northeast of the Garden State to the northwest, where one of my most anticipated rail expansions is expected to come online this year. And that is the branching of New Jersey Transit's Morris and Essex lines to a new station at Andover, which marks the completion of the first part of the revival of the legendary Lackawanna Cutoff. What is the Lackawanna Cutoff, some of you may be asking? Well, the Lackawanna Cutoff is a sort of proto-high-speed railway that was built in the 1910s and formed the fast element of the former Lackawanna Railroad main line between New York City and Scranton, Pennsylvania, until it was abandoned in the 1980s by Conrail. However, the line was acquired by the New Jersey Department of Transportation for possible future restoration, and through strong advocacy work led by the North Jersey Rail Commuter Association and their president Chuck Walsh, it saw the political will and more recently the cash to not only restore service for NJT to Andover, but for that to be the launch pad of the ultimate goal: an Amtrak intercity service between New York and Scranton, which would see them run at speeds of 110 miles an hour along the old cutoff, of which the right-of-way, including the massive fills and the spectacular viaducts, are still there and are going to be reused after some patch-up work. The Lackawanna really built them that well back in the day. With the heavy lifting fully underway, opening of NJT service to Andover is aimed to happen at earliest this year, though exactly when is not known for sure. Regardless, I'd love to make a trek out to North Jersey to see it for myself when it opens, since this has been decades in the making, and not only opens up rail to more places in the rural and ex-urban parts of North Jersey, but firmly lays the groundwork in place for something far greater for both northern New Jersey and northeastern Pennsylvania. Moving from one coast back to the other, we head back to California for the next little series of extensions. But instead of SoCal, we're heading to NorCal, Northern California, for this one, to talk about two extensions of service involving the most traditional, read old-fashioned and outdated, commuter operation serving the Bay Area, the Altamont Corridor Express, as well as an Amtrak service in the region undergoing some major changes, the Amtrak San Joaquins. Yes, it'll still be the San Joaquins to me, damn it. The new name is lame, honestly, but it must be acknowledged. The San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority, the government entity overseeing the service, is slowly working to move the service from being an Amtrak service to a service in California's overarching state rail plan, which doesn't necessarily have to rely on Amtrak as a service provider. And as a part of this, the Joint Powers Authority, ostensibly to show the usefulness of the service beyond its namesake San Joaquin's Valley, but in actuality was because the San Joaquin's name was trademarked by Amtrak, renamed the service last year to the Gold Runner. And I agree with pretty much everyone else's take on this one. You seriously couldn't have picked a better name than that? It just reeks of a name that you picked because you had a deadline to hit, you couldn't bother to be creative today, so you let ChatGPT do the work. Well, anyways, regardless of the uninspiring name change, there are some really good things on the horizon for both Gold Runner and the Altamont Corridor Express. Two really big things, in fact. The first one has an effect on both services, which is an extension of the Gold Runner from downtown Sacramento to a new station at Natomas to the north of the city, which offers a bus service to Sacramento Airport. And will also see the Altamont Corridor Express service extended from its current terminus at Stockton all the way up to Sacramento and the new Natomas Airport station. That's already a decent extension as is, which will really help expand ridership markets, especially for Ace adding Sacramento to its roster, but we're not done yet. There's another extension that's set to open this year to the south of this one, seeing Altamont Corridor Express services run on a new branch line from the junction at North Lathrop, just south of the current Ace terminus at Stockton, running southeast to Ceres via Modesto, making Ace both a commuter corridor between Sacramento, Stockton, and San Jose, but also from the northern tip of the Central Valley to Sacramento. And with a planned extension from Ceres to Merced at some point, perhaps one day it means that this connects with California high-speed rail. Eventually. And this is the beginning of a lot of really great ideas that California has, because unlike almost every other state in this country, they actually have a statewide rail plan for passenger rail that is actually visionary in its aims, particularly its service reach and goals for electrification that are far beyond just the high-speed rail project. It may not be entirely fleshed out at this moment, though that will take a while because it's relatively early days, and a certain part of an earlier vision of the plan where a certain dead-end technology that everyone who has used it wants to abandon en masse because it sucks, hydrogen, is apparently still on order before it inevitably flops. Just get it off my screen. But it is amazing to see this kind of a vision for a state's passenger rail network, while also increasing freight capacity in the process. This is the kind of thing you need to lay out if you have any thought at all for the future of your transport system that doesn't involve running your road network into the dirt and perpetuating all of your current transport system's negatives for the people who need to move themselves and their goods around. But that is going to be the subject of another video series. Moving away from California at last, partly because I have no faith in the purported Dreamstar line service, a privately run overnight sleeper train between San Francisco and LA, to happen because they have done literally nothing of importance to actually getting a service started. No trains have been purchased, nothing has been negotiated, it's all just renders at this point. Let's move on to something a bit more lighthearted.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Yeah, that joke was lame. There's a few more light rail and streetcar extensions happening this year, so let's give them some love, shall we? We'll start off with one that made big headlines last year and only looks to add on to it this go around. And that's the second extension in as many years of the KC streetcar in Kansas City. This time heading north from its current terminus at River Market in downtown to Berkeley Waterfront along the Missouri River. The Riverfront extension, as it's being called, looked to take advantage of a lot of developments in the area known as the Berkeley Waterfront development. And to get to them and avoid the maze of railroad tracks in the area, a quite impressive viaduct is being built as the major architectural piece of the line. It kind of reminds me of the one on the Waterfront line in Cleveland. Hopefully with less cracking damage in the long term on this one. It's certainly a shorter extension than the previous one last year south from Union Station to the University of Missouri Kansas City was, but with how dense the area is and the density being built in the area with the streetcar in mind, which I should reiterate is one of the few modern streetcar lines that's actually been a legitimate success in terms of ridership, this should be pretty good too. It turns out if you make the streetcar good, run it in dedicated lanes or medians, and have it serve places people want to go, people will ride it. Who knew? That's certainly a topic I'll go deeper into another video in a couple of months' time, but this is taking an already good streetcar project and making it even better. And the fact that it has its own dedicated right-of-way, heck, its own viaduct, adds to this. I'd be excited to see how this one goes, and I'd love to actually see it in person. No promises, but a trip to KC might not be a bad idea. Though, largely for the barbecue and for snickering at the Chiefs as the insufferable Eagles fan that I am. Next up, we head across the Show Me State to the other big city there, St. Louis, for the next extension. No, it's not the long-suffering Green Line project, as much as I would have loved for that one to actually be built. But the St. Louis Metrolink light rail, no, not that Metrolink, is getting an extension, albeit on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River, rather than the Missouri side most people would think of when you hear the phrase transit project in St. Louis. This project is an extension of the Metrolink network from the previous end terminus at Shiloh Scott, serving Scott Air Force Base, and effectively making a loop around the base to reach its new end terminus, which is the terminal of the adjacent MidAmerica St. Louis Airport, which is definitely not the main airport of St. Louis's region. That goes to Lambert Airport on the other side of the river, which is already served by Metrolink and is the western terminus of the Red Line. MidAmerica is effectively a mixed-use cargo airport, but at least is a hub for one air carrier, the low-cost carrier Allegiant. And since it's connected to Scott Air Force Base, the airport also has facilities for Boeing on site. Perhaps not the most obvious airport to get a transit extension, but it's definitely good for the airport to not be entirely reliant on nearby Interstate 64 to get there. And it could be good future-proofing if St. Louis becomes a bigger air hub, since Lambert can't really expand its footprint much anymore. Plus, the last time they did, they demolished pretty much a whole suburb, pissed off everybody, and it turned out to be useless in the end. I have to be convinced that this extension is going to bring the ridership some might hope to the network, But combined with ongoing rehab work to the infrastructure that the system was built on, some within St. Louis itself being built in the 1890s, that was not misspoken, it could indeed mark a smaller scale but promising improvement to a system that really ought to have more to make it stand out in my eyes. Now you just need to use some necromancy to revive the Green Line project and I'll really be happy for St. Louis. And finally, we get to the last of the 3 light rail and streetcar extensions to watch for this year. And this one takes us to Salt Lake City, where the 2-mile-long S-Line streetcar route will have a short extension from the current eastern terminus at Fairmont to a new station at Highland Drive, serving a big shopping center and apartments in the area. Of the streetcar lines built in recent decades, the S-Line could be described perhaps as one of the streetcars of all time, and it could be accused of being one of those routes that was built as a development accelerator rather than a people accelerator. But regardless, it's still good to see this little extension take place and free a pretty car-dependent shopping district from the burden of being solely fixed on cars as the way people get there. There is a vision for a longer extension, this time bringing the streetcar further north to serve Westminster College, but it's since been mired in a lot of controversy. Largely, as I understand it, because city officials and locals didn't realize that the S-Line is its own thing and not technically a part of Salt Lake City's larger and much more famous tram network, the TRAX light rail system, even though both that and the S-Line are run by UTA, the Utah Transit Authority, and as such is seeing opposition from city officials and certain residents. I'm sure someone from Salt Lake City will be able to correct me or elaborate further on that point. Hopefully that can all be resolved by at least teaching some people basic differences between the system, and hopefully more of Salt Lake City can see rail transit extensions in the future. But seriously, this line really should have been part of the TRAX network to me, and trying to make it its own thing seemed kinda dumb. I personally think Portland only got away with it because the streetcar network actually connects well with the Max light rail and serves a totally different purpose within the city, and this one doesn't seem to me to be that. I know Salt Lake City has some bold ideas being pushed around, see also the Rio Grande plan, which I really like, but even the smaller stuff needs to be emphasized and improved on here too, because this was kind of a weird idea. Good potential I think, but weird. And now as we move away from light rail projects, we go on to one project involving a sort of middle ground rail service. And that is the weird realm of hybrid rail, which is a nebulous and in my view pointless term as it involves running on heavy rail track with multiple unit trains that are often using European spec multiple units like Stadler Flirts, often with minor modifications but are often kept separate from heavy rail trains by either physical separation or timetabling. So yeah, it's kinda heavy rail but with weird extra steps because people here didn't trust the structure of European trains, even though it's kind of a moot point with regulation changes that happened after hybrid rail became a thing. I'll go more into depth on that front another time, but there is one hybrid rail system that's looking to see an expansion this year, and it's in a state that already has had some big ones last year and probably one of the last states you'd expect. We're going to Texas, namely to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, where the Fort Worth-centered hybrid rail line TEXRail is getting a southward extension from the current southern terminus at the old Texas and Pacific station in downtown Fort Worth, 2 miles along the Union Pacific Dallas subdivision to a new station serving the medical district. I've been digging around for more specifics on this one, but it's been difficult to find much besides the environmental clearance, the grants that have been given to the project, and its projected opening date being this year. So I guess it's happening, but not much is certain yet for what I've seen when it comes to its launch. Especially since the maps I've seen don't really have an indication on where this new station is, and therefore it's really hard to find progress on it. If anyone does know, definitely let me know in the comments. Regardless, it's definitely very fascinating to see so much rail expansion come to a region often cited as hostile to good transit. Just look at the opening of the Dart Silver Line last year, another hybrid rail line, especially for a region whose major transit agency has been facing budget crises aplenty, as has many systems, and even threats by some of its member cities to leave it. Yeah, Texas is certainly a strange beast when it comes to transit, and it's far from black and white. As this and other projects, such as Project Connect in Austin, and perhaps most pertinent, a recent report from TxDOT, the Texas Department of Transportation, the kings of the crazy freeways themselves, that, yes, Texas desperately needs to expand transit services, from high-density transit in major cities to rural bus services serving small isolated towns in the prairies and beyond the Triangle. There's a lot to be frustrated about when it comes to Texas, but if both the advocates I've seen and even TxDOT's recent change of heart is any indicator, Texas has some hope that I think not many would have expected a few years ago. And for more on this one, I highly recommend my friends Lewis and Chris at the channel Transit Tangents, who I chatted with last year about Philly's transit budget crisis. They're based in Texas, even if one of them is staying in Germany for a while, and they talk about nationwide topics. But their coverage of Texas transit topics and the conversations they've had is second to none in my estimation. Here's hoping they can lead the charge to make transit in Texas something that the Lone Star State can be proud of. Now, can you please save Texas Central while you're doing that? Please? And finally, we get back to the heavy rail side of things for the last three projects, starting with, oh goody, another project I talked about last year that got delayed. This time, it's a transit expansion I was excited for, as it took place in one of the last states I would expect to see a meaningful expansion, one that's not Texas anyway. And that was Indiana. Yes, there is a electrified rail expansion happening in Indiana this year. Namely, it's the new Monon corridor, a branch of the South Shore Line, a really cool electric commuter rail service from Chicago to South Bend. This new branch line starts at Hammond Station and heads near due south along the route of the former Monon Railroad, hence the name, to the towns of Munster and Dyer, 9 miles away, running mostly as a shuttle service off-peak due to it being single track for most of it, with through trains to Chicago's Millennium Station happening during rush hours. So yeah, I remember talking about this line last year, saying that it was supposed to open in May of last year. But for some reason that I haven't been able to discover as of yet, it's expected to open, in the South Shore Line's words, in the first quarter of this year. Kind of vague, but it's nice to see that it's almost ready, since an expansion of an electrified heavy rail system in the US is exceptionally rare and always cool to see, especially for an old classic interurban like the South Shore Line. Part of me wishes it was the old idea to extend it to Valparaiso, but I'll definitely take this one. Especially with how weird a relationship Indiana has with mass transport generally at a state level. At least the part around Chicago gets love. Indianapolis, though? Nah, you're fine with BRT. For God's sake, Indiana. Getting towards the end, we have two more to cover, and the first of them is a more recent development that's seeing a quick birth, and while perhaps temporary to start with, could be a harbinger of better things to come. And that is the, again temporary, extension of Metro North's Hudson line, which currently runs from New York City's Grand Central Terminal to Poughkeepsie, New York, with electrified service ending at Croton Harmon. Now, this is going to be extended all the way to Albany, all the way up the Empire Corridor along the Hudson, an extension of over 60 miles. Now, there's a reason why this is being done and why I say it's a temporary measure. And it has to do with improvements being done to the Northeast Corridor at present, namely the renovation work to the East River tunnels. With one of the 4 tunnels at a time having to be shut down for the renovation work, several Amtrak services have had frequency cutbacks going into and out of New York. This is a key reason why the new Amtrak Floridian service exists, replacing the Silver Star that would have run up here. But at least 2 daily round trips of the Empire service, which run between Penn Station and Albany, have been removed from the timetable. To make up for the cutback, the MTA has taken up at least one of those vacancies, running 1 round trip a day between Grand Central and Albany, with the expected focus being on a rush hour time frame on each trip, which is to say to New York in the morning and back to Albany in the afternoon. At the time of writing, the only date we have for it is early 2026, so keep an eye out for it. I'll have to give it a look myself, maybe even give it a try and see how riding a commuter train for that long feels compared to taking Amtrak. Regardless, it seems a useful stopgap to keep service levels roughly even with the previous frequencies, and if it's successful, it could lead to more local-focused services appearing on the Empire Corridor, while Amtrak focuses on the faster intercity services, like on the Northeast Corridor. It's only a theory as of now, but it will be curious to watch this one unfold this year and see what happens. And finally, we get to one that I've been watching, at least in part around here, but its initial effects will be felt on the other side of the continent before it really makes its presence felt around me. And that is the very first sets of Amtrak's new Airos trains being built by Siemens finally entering revenue service. This first batch of sets are undergoing testing right now on the Northeast Corridor and Keystone Corridor, and while I've tried, I've only gotten a few shots of them because I swear these things have been trolling me lately. In any case, while they're testing here in the Northeast, these first sets are made specifically for the Cascade service in the Pacific Northwest, with 8 train sets going up there to replace the rotted out Talgo sets, the corroded Horizons, and the stopgap of Amfleets with something much more new and modern, and one that will be much more common around the country in a few years' time. To demonstrate that, I think I need to explain the Airos program more generally. Back in the 2010s, Amtrak and the state DOTs of California, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Missouri placed joint orders with Siemens for new locomotives and passenger car sets for corridor services that Amtrak ran that were backed by the state governments. This resulted in the Siemens Charger locomotive and the Siemens Venture passenger car sets, the former being a diesel locomotive that was essentially based on the Siemens Vectron platform, lightly, and the latter being an Americanized version of the Siemens Viaggio comfort coaches that have seen service across Europe, most famously in Austria. After these initial orders, which were initially technically troubled, especially the locomotives, Amtrak went back to Siemens to expand on this concept for the trains that needed to replace the aging rolling stock Amtrak had for their intercity routes. Most notably, the 50-year-old Amfleet coaches used on corridor trains. In 2021, Amtrak sealed the deal with a deal for Siemens to build at least 83 train sets with options for 132 based around the Charger and Venture concept, but doing so in semi-permanently coupled sets of trains, in a concept that Amtrak took direct inspiration from of the legendary Austrian railjet trains, generally considered to be the best below high-speed trains in Europe, though some consider them to be high-speed trains in some regards, but that's kind of pedantry. Oh, and those ones were also built by Siemens, by the way. The trains that are under testing at the moment are the first ones, which are diesel-powered, only made up of 6 coaches, and 8 of them are being built specifically for the Cascade service. The next ones to come online afterwards are the most interesting of all, which are an order for 32 dual-mode electro-diesel 8-car train sets made to replace Amfleet sets on the Northeast Regional service on the Northeast Corridor, along with 26 6-car electro-diesel sets for other services on the East Coast, such as the Keystone, Pennsylvanian, Carolinian, Vermonter, Palmetto, Valley Flyer, and the Hartford Line service, among others. The reason these are definitely the most interesting is that they'll be able to run on electric power from the overhead lines on the corridor, albeit with the pantograph mounted on the first passenger car, sending power to the locomotive and an extra powered axle on the first coach, so that they'll be able to run the same 125 mph top speed as the current Northeast Regionals and corridor services. These trains are expected to start appearing in 2027, 2028-ish. After those, there will be a final batch of 17 train sets made specifically for services through upstate New York on the Empire Corridor, as well as the Ethan Allen Express, Maple Leaf, and Adirondack services, which will be 6-car sets, replacing the pantograph on the first car with a battery tender. Yeah, apparently that's still an idea they have for it. I'm not sure if they'll actually follow through, particularly since these trains will come around in 2029, 2030 or so, but it's still a weird idea, considering that the current Genesis locomotives from the 90s that they use on the Empire Corridor have third rail shoes to run on electric power, and Metro North is running their own Siemens Chargers now that have third rail pickups that can run the entire length of the Hudson line from Grand Central to Croton Harmon on electric power. The big problem and the reason why this idea was picked in the first place is the connection between Penn Station and the Hudson line, since that connection up the west side of Manhattan is not electrified. So I presume they want to go with battery to avoid the power switches, especially since you need two types of third rail pickups, because there are two different kinds of third rail systems in New York. Yes, really. But I, like most people who take long-term improvements seriously, just slap my forehead thinking about it. Generally, battery trains are going to prove themselves to be good at certain things, but intercity trains are not one of them. I will grant this, it will only be used within New York City, and the diesel engine will be the primary means of power for the train, but it's still a very weird and kind of short-sighted short-term solution in my estimation. And it's a view that seems to be shared with people in the rail industry I've gotten to know. Battery trains will be their own video though. Regardless, the first Airos sets for the Cascades are going to be undergoing testing throughout this year, and I'll be trying to get as much footage as I can. From what I've heard, they've been having some teething issues, but you can't expect a new train type to be perfected, even if the locomotive design has been around for nearly a decade at this point. Here's hoping Siemens doesn't face the same problems that Alstom does with the Avelia Liberties, and we actually see the first Airos sets hit the rails for the Cascade service, since that service desperately needs it, even if the amount of trains ordered for that service is questionable in its own regards. The Airos are going to be a topic of their own video too, but it will be interesting to see how it all plays out. Regardless, this is a project that will set the course for Amtrak for decades to come, and they have to be ready for it. And as I'll demonstrate in that upcoming video, they kind of aren't at the moment. The start could be a bit rough, but these trains still have a potential to be a success. Here's hoping they do. And also that the seats are more comfortable than the Venture sets in California that a lot of people have complained about, even though some have argued that they're exactly the same as Brightline seats. I can't verify that personally, but there seems to be an argument for that. And with that, those are some of the things I'm keeping an eye on for the coming year, at least in terms of projects getting finished. But there are many more that are seeing progress and even more that need to be pushed to get started in the first place. But it's easy to see that those will be difficult to start in the next few years, what with the attitudes of government generally at the moment and the general chaos of our current situation. I mean, if the situation we had last year with SEPTA's budget crisis in the Philadelphia region is any indicator, we'd be fighting for survival first and improvement second. However, it's rarely ever as simple as that, and with that complexity always comes opportunity. An opportunity for good things to happen, not just bad, and I definitely want more of the good stuff to happen. It's something that I'm going to be experiencing firsthand as I take my advocacy to the next level next year and actually working on a local government committee to see a passenger rail service restored around my area. You see, I'm not content to just mope about stuff. I'm getting involved too. And you can as well. You can do a lot more than you might expect. Even by just coming out to rallies and meetings of advocacy groups and for specific causes that matter to you, you can make your voice heard, and a voice added to the chorus makes it more likely to be heard by more people. And you yourself can get closer to the decisions than you might expect. I mean, if you were to ask me when I started this channel 2.5 years ago that I'd be parlaying it to being on a government committee, I think you were nuts. But that's what can happen if you really want to see how we can make stuff happen. And I got a lot more to talk about to give voice to transportation concerns that we face in this country, and visions for how we can make it as good as we deserve to have, which is to say, world class. And of course, I definitely want to thank everyone that has watched my stuff, since without you, I don't think I'd be saying the stuff I just mentioned. But even when I was just starting out, I was heading out to events and meetings to find out about the issues we face, and what could be done to fix them. I just didn't realize I'd be playing a role in it that would be as close to the machinery as it turned out to be. But even with this, there are a lot more things to discuss, a lot of things to ramble about, and I'm sure a lot of things that will make this year full of unexpected surprises. I hope to see you following them, so that not only can I keep you intrigued and excited, but so that we can all, in our own ways, become that group of people asking questions and seeking answers to make much, much better the future of how we get around.